Today, I'm very excited to announce that we have our esteemed colleague and expert, Veronica Stewart, with us, a business agility workplace transformation coach. Topic is about the modern workplace shift to entrepreneurial agility. I just want to set up the playing field for this topic before I'm going to go ahead and ask questions, a lot of questions to Veronica. So I have some facts with me here. According to ADP Research Institute, almost 44% employers have official flexible working policies in place, which is up from 24% pre-COVID. Almost 65% workers are upbeat about the flexibility of opportunity they will have in future. Another, ADP data shows employer call for guidance on flexible work and pay option has rose over 116% year over year. And lastly, ADP also found that half of small businesses and 84% of larger businesses are making adjustment to their business model, especially how to market their product and services. These are just amazing facts that's actually made me realize that we don't understand the impact that the technology or the agility or the practice has in our organizations. So let's start. Now, Veronica, it's your turn. Are you ready? Okay. So we talk about workplace shift and entrepreneurial agility. So for our audience and viewer, would you like to shed a light on it, what that actually is?
Well, it really goes into the essence of being agile versus doing agile.
Okay.
And that's really the key when it comes to agility. And when you're thinking about your workplace, and I know the theme of today when we're talking about entrepreneur agility,
yes,
is that you have to be in a state of mind in your thinking, in which in turn drives those practices and processes that you use.
True.
And so startups, if we really think about how they think of things, they're so used to being naturally VUCA. And it really being uncomfortable with the unknown, because being in a startup is all about unknown. I had a guest that actually worked with startups. She was a consultant, and she said, you know, if you are not comfortable with unknown, then you probably have no business in startups.
True.
Because it's all about not knowing. And so there's a mental state of being uncomfortable with unknown, being comfortable to experiment, and getting really smart about those experiments. Because at the end of the day is you are trying to create something that customers want and need in order to drive profitability, right? That's the whole goal of a startup, is to make profit and to be able to grow. So when we think about organizations today and what's really happening out there, we can learn a lot from what they are used to doing, and how that ties back into an organization that thought they were stable, but we know today that doesn't mean anything anymore. What is stable today?
Are you
working in the world of instability?
Are you saying in the context of pre-COVID and post-COVID, or you are just saying in general?
So it was always there before COVID, but it's like it was putting gasoline on the existing and accelerating it. And so now anyone that didn't believe that it could hit them, they realize it can. And it's hit them in two ways. It's hit them based on how markets are quickly changing and will continue to change. But it's also hidden in another thing, because we have now a huge shift of what's actually happening out there with people. Companies are like, oh no, we might lose our talent.
True.
There's a big, huge conversation around that. And so now we know that there is pressure and needing to change because the way that they're working and they thought that they were stable, we've introduced very different dimensions of instability into their system.
True.
And so now they're trying to figure out how to function in it.
Yeah, I understand that. So in terms of when you talk about work-life balance, and it seems like it's an ongoing discussion. So do you think that it's more applicable and adoptable now by the organization, because sometimes the organizations are so traditionally equipped that they don't want to change, even though the time requires them to?
Well, it's almost like a combination from talking to people. They want to change, but they don't know how to change. They want to change, but there's so much to change and they don't know where to begin. And then there's some that you're probably talking about that they're going to wait it out and see if they need to change. Right.
True.
It's human nature. Until you go through this process, right? And when it comes to changes, you have awareness that you need to do it. And then you have this desire. And the desire really comes from two things, right? It's fear or pain. True. And we don't want fear, but a business can have fear of going out of business and not having possibility. But a lot of what drives it is the pain. And we call this, we call this a lot in life coaching and success coaching, is stacking the pain. And what is that pain that really motivates you to actually do something and get to action? It has to be painful enough to actually do something.
Okay. Do you have a practical example to share with our audience?
So, a practical example of what's actually happening out there today?
Yeah.
So, well, let's take what's happening right now with the millennial workforce. So it's 50% of the workforce out there today are millennial workers. So you've probably heard of the Great Resignation, the Great Reclamation. You've heard of all these different things that are out there today. And that is an example of that pressure and stacking the pain, because you have a 50% of the workforce. And we're looking at, if you're not sure where the millennial is, think of the highest age is probably, these are leaders that are in their 40s. Some of them are owning companies. Some of them are in middle, emerging leaders. So there are a variety of different levels that they're in today because they're in their 40s. And a lot of them are going through the process and the motions of, there's more to life than just working. And we want choice. Now, if you really look at the characteristics of millennials, it's very different compared to the majority of the other generations before them. And so there's a lot of pressure because I give them, I'm not even a millennial, I'm a zennial. So when I say this, I say this, but in a perspective way is, hats off to them that they actually are brave to be able to go after what they really want. And so when we talk about these decisions about life and well-being, they are putting a test because they're basically saying, if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to go get it somewhere else. I'm saving my money and I'm planning on actually switching careers. I'm saving my money to basically tell you goodbye if that's the end state. A lot of them are preparing for what they truly want, even though you might not know it right now. And so, or a lot of them are showing it.
Yeah. So they have a distinct path in their, they have the vision for where they want to go. And that's how they're achieving it.
Well, and there's a lot of them, if we want to circle it back to the technology space. So this is probably when you talk about practical things that are happening out there today, is that the technology space, it's been proven the fact that you can do this remotely.
So do you think that technology is creating the snowball for adapting the agility in the organization in terms of how things are going?
Well, technology has always played a role of any changes in society, if you actually look at history. And so we've already been in this phase of technology already changing the landscape, in the digital sense. But like I said, with COVID, it actually accelerated what was actually happening already today.
True.
And what it did, it put us in an incubator and tested the theories out there of the what if. So there were a lot of companies before COVID that were remote, and they were able to fully function quite successfully and achieve, their business results. They were profitable, right? They were high performing. And so they were already experimenting this before then, and they were using technologies to further collaborate and so forth. So what happened was during this time, during COVID, with people, being at home, I wish I would have invested in some stock in some of these companies.
So true. Is that Amazon and Zoom would have been
but they proved that, and a lot of people now, you remember, perception is projection, that people didn't think they actually could work remote. They didn't think that you could collaborate, and we're starting to prove that is just a theory or a perception amongst people. Now, put aside the connections of the human connections or what might have you, but when you try to go to this with an argument that we cannot work unless we are in a office together, I think we prove that is not true in the last year.
True.
So they've already debunked that as a theory to where it wasn't factual, and now they have a new theory that it's possible, and they're proving it to be a reality. Now, where we come out of this is a whole other conversation, but it's opened up how people think, and they're rethinking of what work looks like today and in the future. So when we get back to the question of technology, yes, it's always been there and it's always been a driver, but now it's actually accelerated because now you're seeing a lot of technology companies enabling remote working.
True. And it is practically possible to do through technology, that you can collaborate, you can work together as a team, which was a myth, as you said earlier. You mentioned earlier that it was just a theory, but in 2020 and 2021, it's not a theory anymore.
No. And then if we look at it on a social perspective and again, this is technology, because technology created social media. Now people are more aware of what is actually possible. You see so many people now, going back to what I was talking about, the millennials, the millennials has a large percentage of entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And so a lot of people are seeing that they can actually go out there and go on their own, because they see it on social media, and you have all these businesses showing you how to do it. And so you have all these businesses showing you how to switch your careers. So there's a plethora of things, even on social media today, encouraging and showing you how to do it.
That's true. And technology has made even the legacy, like if we take marketing, for example, so legacy marketing is like, now we have digital marketing. It's completely different. Who would have thought about having a marketing like that, right?
And so take someone like myself, where I would have never thought, and of getting out there and try to build my personal brand, that I needed other people. And so I basically found a life coach that actually quit her daily, her professional job. She was somebody that worked in a top company in Canada, and she quit a very lucrative job to go on her own. And so she, it was like, but what really intrigued me was how she actually was able to build her world. And she had no presence on LinkedIn, and she did it. And so you see these people on YouTube, and they did it. And so it started to get to think, as especially me being in the Agile community, where you submit to speak to a conference and you're hoping and praying they accept you and to talk in, I started to realize I don't even need that.
It's true.
And I'm not saying it to be negative or like I don't love the Agile community. It's more of, I started to realize I could do this on my own if I put my heart, my my energy and focus on doing it. It's truly possible. And so all of this, if you really think about, is technology created this window There's a lot of people that are even realizing and going, you know what, this whole traditional way of submitting a resume, I talk about that a lot, even on LinkedIn, is build your personal brand and build that personal brand. It's all about networking and developing relationships. Things have changed now. And here's why. Let's get it back to workplace agility and enterprise agility. Independent people know how to go find jobs. That's what they do all the time. It's part of their nature. And so now we're teaching people that have been in companies for 10 years, 20 years, and never really done it, how to actually live like an independent. Because most of us independent people are very resilient and can go find another job very easily because we know how to do it. So now the whole dynamic, getting back to this workplace agility and how things are changing, all of this is because of technology. It opened a world of possibility.
As you said, that one can build their own brand. So if I talk about the components, the different components for a workplace agility, so what do you think they are?
The components of workplace agility. Now that's a good one. Well, workplace agility, I always say, is those three components of people, strategy, and process, because you have to have both. And you have to have a strategy, because if you don't know where your business is going and where you want, what you need to achieve, then you have that lack of clarity, right? When you have lack of clarity, how do you know what you're doing? And that's when people flail. I mean, we teach this in life coaching. All the elements in actually life coaching, right? The first thing that we do is a process called achievable outcomes, and we go through the process. And so part of that strategy is really understanding what you want to achieve, what the outcomes are, and what do you know that you're, or I should say it differently, how do you know you're successful? And so that's measurements or very tangible things. Imagine that. Those simple things are part of the even agility in a workplace. You can really look at that. So strategy is all about that clarity and focus. And when you think about process, well, the steps that you need to take have a direct correlation about how you're going to drive that strategy. And so when you start to think about how you're going to do that, of course, you're going to do it in a way that is going to allow you not only to be effective, but also adaptive. And so when we talk about a workplace agility, it's the ability to be adaptive. Because until you know the actions that you take are the right actions, right, in order to validate that you've actually are moving in the direction to achieve those results. That's why we always inspect and adapt. We're always pivoting. If you had a session one-on-one with a coach, even just the simplest example, we're always talking about the progress and if we need to change the actions, right? Because did they learn something and do they need to pivot? They learn things about themselves and they have to get through if they're stuck or what might have you, or they need to actually think of a different process because what they did may not work. All of these things are very similar in an organization. So now let's get to people. Well, guess what drives strategy and processes? People.
People, True.
And so this is a whole connected system that really needs to work symbiotically together. And so when we think about workplace agility and these components, it's all these components, but then but they all have their own dimensions within each other. When you start to peel that onion further, right? What does it mean by people? What does it mean by strategy? What does it mean by processes? And so, but if you look at it at a high level, these are essential components that need to be in there, and they need to be working symbiotically together because again, businesses are organic systems, regardless of how we want to see it or not, because guess what? Businesses are constructed from people. The last time I looked, there's not many companies out there consisting only of robots. There's probably some human in there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They're not complete automation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And when it comes to strategy and using the high level of brain, do you think that the automation can achieve that? Can people be replaced?
No.
And
No.
because sometimes organizations try to overachieve something, and they say that they can do it without even having a human factor in it. Like when talk about agility, and when we talk about adaptation to being in a flexible and relaxed environment, but at the same time sometimes they overboard. So my question would be that if a company wants to fit themselves in today's era, so what could be the starting? You have already told about the component, but what could be the starting steps to move toward the bigger vision?
Well, it's a great time to revisit your mission and purpose of your company. And I say this because things have changed and your culture might be changing. Your vision of your company might be changing, where it needs to get a little bit polished and sharper. And see how you connect to the world. So I'm going to go back to the millennial workforce. Guess what they are looking for? They're looking for how you as a company are making an impact in the world. And so if your mission and purpose as a company falls flat and you're not emotionally connected to it in some way, and it's not clear, that's a great start to revisit that. And that ends up being the driving force to really look at your core values as a company. And those core values as a company should be the fabric of how you are working as habit. And I posted something like that on LinkedIn. I don't know if it was this week or last week, talking about how important values are. So part of the process, and I'll go back to life coaching because it was funny in my journey when I actually got into life and success coaching. I was the first student myself. And being an agile coach, I couldn't stop seeing the patterns and all the change and all the things that were going on in a business. And I'm going, wow, why does this feel so familiar? And what it is because if we look at the change logical model, and I show that a lot from Peter Dills, and it's a neuro-linguistic programming from that area of technique. And we know that purpose, identity are the top parts of the pyramid, and then it comes to values. So as a company, it is important to understand what those values are, because they should be driving the habits and actions and behaviors of everyone in the company. And so how you hire, how you fire, how you actually design your organization, everything down to the fiber is making sure that you have alignment. What happens when there's a conflict of values?
Yeah, because that would be my next question, that sometimes companies don't adapt to it, but the individuals have the potential or the ability to change, and they want to change. But when there's a conflict, how to resolve it in a productive way?
Yeah, and this is where there's a lot of elements to what you're saying when it comes to the people side, right? Really diving into that is we have a lot to change in just even how we educate. Again, me being a former teacher, I have some probably strong opinions in that aspect.
I completely agree.
And so we don't fault the parents or anybody that, they came out of the same system. And so, the system's broken when it comes to that, when it comes to emotional intelligence, mindfulness, financial intelligence, all of these really key essential things that if people had them and they had confidence and they had security and, just how they feel about themselves as a being, you would see a lot of behaviors and actions very different, which would be very obvious in an organization. So you see years of dysfunction, right, of a broken system from leaders now in organizations and everyone there. I mean, I would consider myself one of them because, my parents were raised in the same kind of education system, and you're dependent on parents that were raised in the same education system in hopes that maybe they're changing some of it, but do they know how? Because it's probably self-taught or taught from their parents. So you have a low probability of success there, right? So getting back to, well, what do we do today in organizations is we try to help shift. And this is the challenge, because now you're working in adulthood where there's a lot of complexities, a lot of life things going on. But what if we actually brought the benefits of life coaching into organizations to help them be a better person inside and out? And so these changes in this entrepreneur agility, kind of bringing that whole, an entrepreneur, and there's a lot of them that are smart will go get a success in life coach, because one, they need to have the mental capacity.
Exactly.
They need to take care of their well-being in order to persevere. So what makes that any different if we taught that in everyone?
That would be amazing. That would be a whole lot of a new talent that would become not as a potential, but as a star, because they will have all the components in them that could not only make the world a better place for them, but for the generations to come.
Yeah, and let's take it and bring it down into, I'm running a business, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to make choices to keep alive. It's a business. And yes, you might have purpose and do good in the world, but at the end of the day, if you don't have profit, that's all going to be in vain. So we want to connect that in a pragmatic way of really thinking about how that helps. So I actually posted today, I always have a Tabletop Friday question about, what's the secret sauce in high performance? And the reason why I say that is because a lot of people will always think it's just, being fast, but that's not true. And this goes back to our conversation about the mind, body, and spirit. And if we really want to have performance and profitability in an organization, we really need to start looking back of what's going to create that. And so I talked about mind, body, and spirit, but I also talked about 3 C's. There's so many 3 C's out there, but these are my 3 C's when it comes to.
It remembers in the class of communication.
But you know what? I've actually learned there's actually research about why things come in 3s, because it's easy for people to remember. And that's why you see a lot of things in 3s, if you notice that, right? Like I have everything in 3s. But there's truth to that. And so, clarity, we kind of touched on that, contribution and impact of people, and then, communication. And so when we talk about high performance, we really want to touch on those areas as well, in addition to that mind, body, and spirit as an individual. Because if we're trying to function as a business, we want to care about having clarity. We want to care about contribution and impact. And we want to care how we're communicating. And the reason why we want to care about those 3 things is, again, I mentioned clarity. If you don't know where you're going and why, one is, how do you know we're doing the right things? How do you know that, people are actually aligned and bought into it, right? Or they're just kind of doing their thing. The last thing a company wants today is people coming in and just collecting a paycheck.
Yeah.
That's not gonna create a thriving business. Because one is, you don't even know if you're getting the best out of them.
Those were old ways to do it.
Exactly.
Now, in future, like everybody want a proactive employee, a one that can contribute, that can add value, that can bring something new to the table. That's the expectations in today's world.
And be creative about that. And there's very different ways. And so part of contribution and what I do, I measure impact. And that's where you saw my LinkedIn about the collective impact, agility, and impact guide. And so I work with I'm a GC partner, work with the GC Index, which is located there in UK, by the way. And what it is it's a business tool that allows you to measure impact in the preferred way that people will contribute in a positive way. And when we start to understand these energies, which, by the way, it's an outcome-based people framework. Once you know your outcomes, you actually can align people to the outcomes. Imagine that. But here's the beauty of it. It's a win-win situation, because now you're aligning people to where they truly want to be, that lights them up, and that you'll get the best out of them, because that's where their passion is, and how they contribute. And so there's these 5 ways that people want to show up and contribute and get to action, that we actually now have the data and science to help you do that. And so when we talk about contribution, now we can actually be smart with our people strategies, and really start to understand what we need to do as a business in a very smart and pragmatic way. But we also can align people in a very smart and pragmatic way to make better business decisions around it. And then 2, no, that's 3. I'm already on 3 now. And 3 is really address the people equation. And what do I mean by the people equation is what's on everyone's mind about diversity, inclusion, and engagement in employees. This actually is a natural thing, because it has nothing to do with your personality, has nothing to do with your race or gender or anything. It's about how you contribute. It also is about ensuring that you're doing things that they naturally will want to be, and they're going to be motivated to do it, because that's where their energies go. So it's a win-win.
It is.
And then let's talk about communication. So communication is so vital, because at the end of the day, we think it's so easy, but it's not. Because a lot of us we don't understand what's happening during that interaction. And what do I mean by that is, have we actually created a space of trust, good rapport with each other? Are we able to be transparent and honest, so we can get through and talk about the things that we really need to do to get to action and really get things done? Are we taking the initiative and being proactive to collaborate with each other? And so all these elements of communication, we can go probably on and on and on and on. These 3 C's that I talk about in relation to people, right? Strategy and process, you need the clarity in contribution and, communication to drive those 3 things. You have it's so key to what we talk about workplace agility. And so when we adopt just processes, what companies love to process, and that's all they focus on, they're missing the element, because you will only get so far. And you wonder why you hit a ceiling, because what's really going to drive, especially lean agile processes, is the other 2 have to be along with the ride and working symbiotically with those processes. Because in order to have agility, you have to have clarity in that strategy, and you should and have to be outcome centric and be measuring and validating, right? All of those good things. And you also need to be thinking about your people, kind of like what I was talking about. If you don't, because again, those processes will only go so far without those 2 elements. And I see all the time, they're so focused on just doing Scrum or just implementing SAFe, and they miss the point where, what do you think drives that?
Yeah. The core thing that's missing there, and they take it like as is, and they divide it, and then they pick pieces, but at the same time, it's not going to work well if they are not together.
And I love when you're talking about pieces, because I was actually talking about this the other day. I told you I was really creative before we started recording. Is I'm going to be agile about this. So think incrementally and iteratively, that we actually looked at it like a vertical slice. Your strategy, your people, and process. And we looked at what we can take and incorporate. So when you talked about organizations, how do they start moving? Well, you do it incrementally and iteratively, but you do it with a vertical slice.
Mostly.
And it's almost like we need to approach it in an agile way as well, but we need to do it across those cake slices, as we like to talk about in agile, because that's how you're getting all elements. But you don't have to boil the ocean, because guess what? The larger the organization or the more people and the more complexities you have, that's not pragmatic. But if you actually took a slice and start chipping away at it, eventually you're going to get that whole cake.
True. And that's
when
what
you talk about that symbiotic and bringing them together, when we start approaching that, when we want to have this workplace agility or having the entrepreneurial agility, you've got to approach all three together.
True.
And if you want to truly survive in this VUCA world, right? Highly volatile, there's lots of uncertainty. And if we think this is only temporary, we don't know how we're even going to come out of this going into 2022. They have all this research about the people part, but I'm going to tell you right now, we are the most complex individuals. They shouldn't think they know us, because they don't.
They don't.
I think they're the most unpredictable factor out there.
Yeah. Every day it's a new day, new startups, new things happening. People are doing new stuff, and I think it's in this era we have to be agile to survive for sure.
And so it's definitely one of those things where it's a big rethink.
Yes.
And when we think about what we need to start rethinking is probably rethinking about even our perceptions and how each one of us, how are we behaving and acting, and really understanding what our values are as individuals, and then collectively, right?
Exactly. We have to go to our roots and basics and see what we as an individual are, and then so that we can impact on the society, and we can create a better organizations and a society overall, so that the generations to come will say that, okay, they have done something, they have given us something. Because I think this generation is the most tech savvy generation of all. I think you will agree with me.
Yeah, we are learning a lot. Next week, we're interviewing a millennial leader, and how they're changing the way of business. My co-host, and I, we really love talking about these things because we're fascinated by it. And again, we're zillennials. We are not millennials, but we were always what we call game changers. We always challenged the status quo. We always knew that things were possible. We always wanted the modern workplace. And that modern workplace is actually starting to happen. It's almost like we were too ahead of our time. And the things that are happening right now is what we are actually trying to have happen. And so we're delighted that there's a generation and the future generation of Gen Z coming on board that are saying, no. Like, I have my niece, and I know a lot of, Gen Z is about 50% Some of them don't even want to work in corporations. Like when I talk to my niece, I'm like, would you work for corporate? She was like, oh no, I'm going to try everything possible not to.
True. Because
I'm like, really? And why is that? I get curious and I ask her.
And what did she say?
She wants freedom and choice, and she doesn't want to feel bogged down. She doesn't like the rules. She thinks it's starchy.
Yeah.
Those are her words, starchy.
I understand her, what she meant by that. That's so true. Yeah. Things are that's so true. But it is a good thing that we have the resources, and we have the technology, and we have the knowledge available to us, so that we can bring the change that's necessary. Veronica, it seems like we can go on and on and on about this, and I'm so glad that this is my first podcast and you were my guest, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I know we have a time limitation, but I really appreciate for you to come again and join us for one of the other sessions, maybe not with me, but with some other podcasts. And I learned a lot. It's been a privilege talking to you, and I really hope that our audience and our viewers can relate to what we talked about, because it was so real and it was so educating. Then I really enjoyed myself. So thank you for bringing so much experience and sharing it with us, so that we can learn. because we are
well, thank you for having me. And really, there's so many people that have been in the Agile space longer than me, have all these experiences, but the position that I take in this is I don't let that intimidate me. Because what I've learned, and again, this is again, when you start to learn who you are and the confidence, my ideas and what I believe, what the future of the workplace doesn't mean that I have to have all these accolades and all these out there that makes me not think that I don't have a point. And all the things that I talk about, I start to realize, and this is why I encourage people to have a voice, is to speak those ideas, because then it starts to show no title required to be a leader, to be a person that has confidence and voice of change. And that is extremely powerful today. And that's what, I hope when people are listening is to you are a leader, no title required.
Leader, no title required. That's how we're going to end our session today. So signing off, thank you so much, Veronica, again for joining us, Agile Friday. And this is Sabila signing off.